Welcome back to the deep dive. Our job, as always, is to take some really complex source material articles, research, philosophical texts, and, well, distill it down into the core knowledge you need.
And for this deep dive, you've shared a really remarkable stack of excerpts with us.
I have. And the premise is uh, truly staggering. I mean, typically when we discuss health, we're in a certain world, right? We're talking pharmaceuticals, metabolic science, maybe microbiome.
But today, we are operating in a completely different universe. We're looking at sources that lay out a unified, holistic theory of well-being.
A holistic theory where the foundation of physical health, it isn't primarily medical or even dietary, which is where a lot of people go next.
Exactly. It's fundamentally moral and behavioral. This source material provides philosophical guidance that immediately translates into these intensely practical and sometimes, frankly, astonishingly specific rules for how adults should behave and how children should be raised.
Okay, let's unpack this because the sources we're analyzing, they make this enormous, almost utopian claim.
They really do.
The claim is that moral integrity, when you couple it with a highly intentional, very positive parenting style, and even certain specific physical actions, can serve as a complete prophylactic, a shield.
A shield against nearly all serious illness throughout a person's life. It's an assurance of health that's built entirely on character.
It creates a perfect closed-loop system, as you put it.
Mhm.
The whole premise is that if you really look at the root cause of human suffering, both psychological and physical,
The ultimate engine is moral corruption or moral failure. So, therefore, the only pathway to true holistic health is this meticulous cleansing of the heart.
and that cleansing then radiates outward, right, to protect the most vulnerable people in any society, the children.
Precisely.
So our mission today is to explore this deep, deep connection. We need to understand not just what the rules are, but why this text links say formula feeding directly to psychological abuse.
Or why achieving a state of radical humility should completely eliminate the need for, world-class heart surgeons. It's a big leap.
It's a huge leap. So we'll start by examining the delicate, sensitive nature of a child's internal state. The source calls it the fitra, and we'll look at the 8 poisons that are said to threaten it.
Following that, we'll have to move to the spiritual prerequisite for all of this, which is the cleansing of the adult heart. And this involves expunging very specific vices like envy and spite and embracing a kind of radical equality. This adult moral state is the necessary condition for any kind of societal health.
Then we get incredibly specific. We'll look at the actual techniques for character building in children. It's a fascinating system of, I guess, behavioral engineering that relies really heavily on attention management.
And finally, we arrive at the section that holds some of the most surprising and non-negotiable commands,
Yep.
the 3 mandatory rights of the child. And these dictate very specific physical interactions between parents and their children.
We have to begin where this entire philosophy must begin, with the child. The sources make a profoundly optimistic claim, I think, about the baseline state of humanity.
They do. They state that the hearts of children are fundamentally pure, that they dwell on the fitra.
Okay, so tell us more about what fitra actually means in this context, because it seems to establish the entire moral standard for all the adults surrounding that child.
Well, fitra refers to an inherent primordial purity. You could think of it as a kind of unblemished psychological and spiritual nature. The source defines the child's heart, which is dwelling in this state, as the most sensitive instrument possible for discerning good from evil.
Like a perfectly calibrated compass.
Exactly like a compass. If the compass is pure, it's always going to point true north. And the implication here is critical. Children are not morally blank slates waiting for us to write on them. They begin with an innate, built-in understanding of righteousness.
That completely reframes the entire task of parenting, doesn't it? I mean, if the child starts in a state of perfection, the adult's role isn't to create goodness.
No, not at all. It's simply to protect the goodness that is already there.
And that explains why the required level of, you called it hypervigilance, from adults is so extreme. If the instrument is that sensitive, it absolutely has to be shielded from any kind of environmental contamination.
Precisely. And the source immediately transitions from this high philosophical idea of purity to the very real, practical threats to that purity. Any action that disrupts this fitra is seen as an instantaneous and severe psychological injury.
And the text doesn't mince words. It lists specific actions that function as poisons.
Yes, the 8 poisons. These are the behaviors cited as being directly damaging to a child's psychological health, or nafsiyat al-atfal.
Okay, we should probably clarify that term, nafsiyat al-atfal. It sounds like it means more than just general psychological health.
It's much deeper. It refers specifically to the fragile, developing ego, the emotional self, and the core spiritual sensitivity of the child. So when the source talks about poisoning this nafsiyat, it's talking disrupting the very formation of a sound character.
Which, in this holistic framework, is the direct precursor to physical disease later in life.
That's the link. The damage is done early, and it manifests physically later.
Let's break down these poisons because the list is really unique. It mixes things we would all agree are harmful with stressors that I think we often dismiss as just minor family friction.
Right. So first, you have the direct, obvious assaults on a person. We can categorize those as physical and emotional abuses.
Like physical harm, beating, which is clearly prohibited, and humiliation.
Yes. These actions directly attack the child's dignity, their sense of self, and they cause an immediate fear. The source calls it kasrat nufuzim,
Which means?
the breaking of their spirits, or their feelings. The source treats this internal emotional breaking as equally, if not actually more, damaging than the physical injury itself.
But the list quickly expands the definition of trauma. It moves into relational and environmental stressors. The adult environment itself can become toxic.
Yes, the text warns against, for example, marital problems between the parents being displayed in front of the child, also coercion or constantly forcing the child to comply with things.
It's recognizing the child as an emotional participant in the family dynamic, isn't it?
Yeah,
They're not just a passive observer who doesn't understand.
exactly. The noise of adult conflict, even if it's not directed at the child, is seen as corrosive to the fitra. And here is the truly fascinating part.
Loud voices.
Yes, this simple act of using loud voices is listed as toxic. The required standard for the home environment is extreme calm, what they would call sakina. A raised voice is considered a breach of the child's psychological safety. It's a contaminant to their innate purity.
The implication of that is profound. It means the adult is failing in their fundamental duty to guard the fitra if they can't even manage their own internal reactivity, whether that comes out as marital strife or just shouting because you're stressed.
That's right, and it gets even broader. It starts to incorporate the moral environment of the whole community.
How so?
Any bad behavior or poor morals displayed by any adult around the child are listed as a direct psychological threat. This means that adults must maintain what's called husn al-khuluq, good moral character, at all times.
Because the child absorbs everything. Not just what is said, but what is modeled. It's a kind of holistic moral shielding.
That's a perfect way to put it.
And now we get to the real point of friction in this list. The item that I think throws a massive wrench into our modern segmented understanding of health.
I think I know which one you mean.
The final item listed among these psychological stressors, right alongside physical abuse, loud voices, and marital stress, is artificial or formula feeding.
This is the intellectual pivot point of the whole section, isn't it? The question is why? Why is the disruption of this natural biological relationship through formula listed as a psychological poison and not just, a less optimal form of nutrition?
Exactly.
Well, the source is suggesting that the disruption of the natural order of the mother-child bond is a stressor of such a huge magnitude that its impact is equivalent to emotional violence. It views the breastfeeding relationship not merely as a way to deliver nutrients.
But as a foundational psychological and spiritual anchor.
Yes, that's what it is,
Yeah.
an anchor.
That forces us to look at the source's implied philosophical definition of stress. I mean, modern science separates stress into chemical, physical, and emotional categories. But this source seems to synthesize them all.
It argues that if a process is unnatural, it generates a profound internal, call it unrest. And that unrest damages the child's developing emotional system, regardless of whether the child is consciously aware of it or not.
So that internal unrest is what damages the purity of the fitra.
Yes. By providing a substitute that breaks that physiological and bonding chain, the adult has introduced an artificial strain. In this system, anything artificial is suspect because it carries the risk of disrupting the innate purity of the child.
And if an adult manages to successfully shield the child from all 8 of these toxins, the source provides an incredible promise. The path to soundness. A direct formula for preventing all illness.
A complete guarantee against sickness. It's conditional, of course, but the promise is there. By this, the age of any child, he will never get sick.
So what is the formula? It has 3 parts, right?
It's threefold. First, maximizing happiness for the children as much as possible. This implies a constant, active pursuit of the child's emotional well-being.
Not just avoiding sadness, but actively creating joy.
Right. Second, ensuring natural and sound nutrition, which we now know places the priority firmly on natural breastfeeding over formula. And third, the indispensable spiritual component,
Which is prayer.
the continuous role of prayer, or dua, to God for the children's well-being. This acts as the spiritual safeguard, underwriting all the physical and emotional efforts of the parents.
So when you look at those three elements together, the profound emotional nurturing, the natural sustenance, and continuous spiritual providence, the source suggests this creates an environmental integrity, a shield so complete that disease simply cannot take hold.
Because disease, in this view, is fundamentally a manifestation of a moral or psychological breach.
But this philosophy immediately exits the private sphere of the home and enters the social contract. It becomes a societal mandate.
A very demanding one. The text asserts that commitment to these standards of moral purity and child protection is a prerequisite before marriage for the sake of all future generations.
This is the bold constraint that really challenges our modern individualism, I think. The text draws a very firm line. It says that anyone unable or unwilling to commit to these duties, to guaranteeing the protection of the fitra and eliminating those 8 poisons, should not marry.
They should not.
But wait, how would something like that even be implemented? Is the source suggesting some kind of, I don't know, a spiritual council or committee that has to certify couples before they're allowed to marry? That seems incredibly prescriptive and logistically complicated.
The source material focuses less on the mechanism of enforcement and more on the philosophical requirement itself. The principle is that the capacity to maintain a sickness-free, morally pure environment for the next generation is a societal obligation. And that obligation precedes the rights of the individual adult to form a union.
So it's not a government bureaucracy, but an internalized constraint, a profound ethical awareness.
That's the idea. If you know deep down that you harbor the vices of malice, or you can't control your loud voice, you are morally bound to abstain from procreation, because you risk infecting the next generation with your own moral failures.
So in this view, marriage isn't simply a relational contract for companionship or property. It's a high-stakes, ethically charged contract for the protection of public health.
Exactly. Your personal moral shortcomings become a public health hazard. It places the focus squarely on the collective responsibility for the moral purity of society. If a commitment to guaranteeing a healthy child is mandatory, then the failure to meet that standard constitutes a kind of moral and therefore social unfitness for marriage.
It's a powerful constraint, ensuring the moral caliber of the parent is the primary focus of the union. That concept, that an adult's inability to control their internal state makes them unfit for marriage, is the perfect transition for us. If the child's purity, the fitra, demands this calm, morally sound environment, then the only way to sustain that is through a fundamental reengineering of the adult's own emotional core.
The sources are completely uncompromising here. The adult heart must be meticulously cleansed of specific negative emotional states. And these states, in this unique paradigm, are the fundamental drivers not just of social friction, but of internal physical illness.
Okay, let's look at the vices to expunge. They start with the obvious high-energy poisons like anger or gadab, and loud voices, which we now understand directly harm the child. But then the source dives into the more insidious, low-grade internal malice.
And these internal vices are the spiritual toxins that slowly corrode the individual from the inside out. Hatred, envy, or jealousy, which is hasad, and spite or malice, gale.
And it's crucial to understand that in this framework, these aren't just personality defects, are they? They're seen as literal physiological dangers.
That's right. Harboring hasad, or envy, is seen as generating an internal toxicity that will eventually manifest in a tangible physical ailment.
It's the ultimate mind-body connection. Sustained negative emotional states are basically chemically toxic to the organism, and the source quickly moves from that individual internal malice to a societal vice.
Yes, the elimination of distinguishing or discriminating between people.
Tamayiz Bain al-Bashar.
Right, and that is the social expression of internal malice. Discrimination stems from an arrogant heart, a heart that believes it holds a superior position to others.
Which brings us to the core doctrine of equality. This has to be a required internal affirmation for spiritual health. No one is better than me, and I am not better than anyone.
That single statement is a call for radical humility, or tawadu. It implies that any sense of superiority, whether it's based on class, wealth, even piety, is a spiritual corruption. If you harbor arrogance, you are structurally unsound, and that spiritual instability will eventually translate into physical sickness.
So the adult has to maintain a state of perfect moral flatlining in their relationships with other people
And this humility is directly linked to the prescriptions for a sound heart. The adult achieves this state by filling the heart with love for the good of others first.
before themselves.
Yes, the text is explicit about that. The primary orientation has to be external wanting peace and benefit for others before you even seek it for yourself.
And while the text assures us that the goodness will return to the giver afterward, the motivation can't be transactional. It has to be altruistic,
Right. This practice of humility and embodying good moral character, husn al-khuluq, is the required maintenance schedule for the spiritual heart.
which sets the stage for what is probably the most provocative, high-stakes claim in the entire source material.
I think so, yes.
If adults universally adhere to these strict moral principles, expunging envy, embracing equality, practicing radical humility, the source guarantees a utopian physical outcome. They will never see anyone suffering from sickness.
Umarina man shuf ayhet taban, we will never see anyone sick.
That's a guarantee of total wellness. It seems incredibly demanding. How does the source reconcile that guarantee with the basic reality of, accidents or congenital issues or even just the simple deterioration of the body over time? Is this promise purely contingent on perfect adherence?
The source implies that the human body, in its sound, natural state, is inherently designed to be resilient. It's capable of repairing itself and is essentially immune to what we call chronic or lifestyle diseases.
Which the authors of these sources see as a consequence of internal moral stress.
Exactly. The diseases that plague us, hypertension, heart disease, autoimmune issues, are seen as reflections of a society and of individuals carrying these internal poisons like chronic envy or hatred. The perfection of health is contingent on the perfection of the moral system.
And the source uses that powerful, specific illustration to drive this point home. If we achieve this moral soundness, we will not need Dr. Mehdi Yaqub.
And for our listeners, Dr. Yaqub is a world-renowned pioneer in complex heart surgery, so the implication is staggering.
Is that the moral purity of the society would be so potent that severe illnesses that require life-saving interventionist medicine, particularly cardiovascular failure, will simply cease to occur.
It completely redefines the origin of chronic disease. Why do hearts fail? Well, in this context, it's not primarily a dietary issue or a genetic predisposition. It's a failure of the emotional and spiritual core.
So when an adult is carrying malice and discrimination, that internal conflict eventually expresses itself physically, and often in the very organ that is said to house the spirit.
Heart disease becomes the ultimate physical manifestation of moral disease.
This connects us directly to a key citation used in the source, the famous prophetic tradition, the Hadith. In the body there is a lump of flesh, mudga. If it is sound, the whole body is sound.
And that mudga, that small lump of flesh, is universally interpreted here as the spiritual heart, or the core self. It's the ultimate determinant of physical health. If the mudga is carrying the weight of hasad or gadab,
Envy or anger.
then it is corrupted. And that corruption broadcasts sickness throughout the physical system. Its health is spiritual first, moral second, and physical third. The integrity of that core is everything.
So the spiritual failure to uphold humility and equality isn't just a bad habit. It's a structural failure that creates the need for complex medical intervention.
And the conclusion drawn from this entire system is that greeting one another with salam alaikum, peace be upon you, is, on its own, sufficient to eliminate the diseases of the world. Peace, then, is the cure.
It's much more than a simple salutation in this context, though, isn't it?
Oh, much more. The word salam itself signifies safety, well-being, the absence of harm. When you actively greet someone with salam alaikum, you are declaring to them, and just as important to yourself, that there is no malice, no aggression, no ill will coming from you.
So if every individual genuinely operates in this state of continuous active peace,
Then the moral toxins that the source identifies as the root of disease, envy, hatred, spite, they just vanish. This external declaration creates the necessary internal moral climate for biological soundness.
this high moral bar leads us to a fascinating and, frankly, highly controversial footnote on surgical ethics within these sources. It briefly states that surgical intervention should only occur after confirming the moral integrity, the sound character of the adult patient.
Al-Salama al-Kulkiya. It's a radical ethical constraint on modern medicine. It suggests that if a patient's sickness is rooted in a fundamental moral failure that they have refused to address, say, chronic hatred or envy, then intervening physically might be a futile attempt to treat a symptom while ignoring the root cause.
So the spiritual and moral audit must precede the physical intervention.
That's what it implies.
But let's challenge the practicality of that. If an adult patient is dying right now, on the table, does the source truly prioritize a moral audit over immediate life-saving intervention? What is the philosophical stake here?
I think the philosophical stake is accountability. The source isn't necessarily saying let them die, but it is establishing a hierarchy of treatment. The true cure is internal moral correction.
So if the external intervention, the surgery, is necessary, it should be done with the understanding that without concurrent moral repair, the underlying engine of the disease will just find a new physical way to express itself.
The source is treating the disease as a consequence of a poor choice, and thus making the choice the primary site of intervention.
And crucially, the source immediately clarifies this rule is for adults only. Why that strict distinction? Why is a moral check required for the adult? But if a child needs surgery, this audit is completely bypassed.
It connects right back to Section 1 and the concept of fitra. The child's heart is assumed to be sound, to be pure. If a child is sick, it is not because of their own moral failure. It's because the adult environment, the parents, the community, has failed them and introduced the poison.
So the child is viewed as an innocent victim.
An innocent victim whose physical ailment deserves immediate intervention without any moral scrutiny. The adult, however, has had agency. They chose malice, they chose envy, they chose pride. Their illness is their accountability. It's an incredibly demanding filter on who is worthy of interventionist medicine based entirely on their moral history.
We've established this enormous moral burden placed on the adult to maintain a cleansed heart for their own health and to protect the child's fitra. So now we move from that high philosophical plane of personal conduct back down to the extremely practical.
Yes, this section of the sources outlines specific strategies for training children. It's a detailed system of behavioral engineering designed to eliminate negative traits and cultivate the positive ones.
The goal here is efficiency in character building, right? And the source material offers a highly structured, sometimes counterintuitive approach that focuses entirely on attention management.
That's the key. Minimizing focus on the negative behavior while maximizing and repeating the focus on the desired positive traits.
Okay, let's start with the strategy for negative behaviors. It's encapsulated in what we've called the 3 rules of non-focus. And the first rule is, I think, the most challenging for many parents. Complete ignoring.
Al-tajahul tamaman. Ignoring is the designated primary defense. If a child acts out, throws a tantrum, or displays a negative trait, unless it's physically dangerous, of course, the adult's first non-negotiable reaction must be the complete withholding of attention.
And the reasoning is psychological.
Purely. Attention, even negative attention like scolding, feeds the behavior. It validates it as an effective tool for getting a parental response. Ignoring starves the negative behavior of its oxygen.
That seems like it would require tremendous patience and, linking back to Section 2, true humility to Wadu. Isn't the impulse of an arrogant heart to immediately correct, to dominate, and to loudly assert authority?
Absolutely. The need to immediately correct and dominate is often driven by the adult's own internal flaws, anger, pride, or a fear of appearing incompetent. True humility allows the parent to step back, to recognize the act is transient, and that their intervention might actually do more harm than good by damaging the child's fitra.
So ignoring requires supreme self-control from the adult.
Which reinforces the idea that parental discipline is fundamentally about adult self-discipline.
The second rule reinforces this restraint. Limited correction. Do not focus on the negative behavior more than once. The source provides a powerful warning here.
A very powerful warning. It says that repetition, even well-intentioned correction, causes the child to internalize and adopt the negative behavior as part of their character.
يتبع عليها الطفل.
Right. It becomes their nature. This is a profound psychological insight we often overlook. When a parent repeatedly addresses the same mistake, you always leave your toys out, or you are still hitting your sister, they are cementing that negative identity in the child's mind.
They're creating a negative self-fulfilling prophecy.
Exactly. The child begins to identify with the label that's attached to the behavior, so the source limits the correction to one single, immediate, impactful address, and then the incident must be dropped.
So you get one shot to address it. And if the behavior recurs, the parent must fall back to Rule 1, complete ignoring, to avoid embedding the vice through repetition.
That's the system.
And if that one shot is taken, the third rule dictates the method of correction. It must be done in a positive, educational, or disciplinary manner, tertibia.
The intent must be gentle restructuring, not condemnation or humiliation. The correction must uplift and teach a replacement behavior. It has to focus on the future, not shaming the past act.
Which is why the source strictly mandates what to avoid.
Yes, laughing, mocking, teasing, or physical violence. These actions are strictly cited as counterproductive because they directly damage the child's nafsiyat. If you mock the behavior, you are violating the principle of consistent respect for the child's personhood.
Okay, so negative behaviors are starved of attention, corrected once, or ignored entirely. But the reverse principle applies to cultivating good traits.
The complete reverse. The strategy for positive behaviors relies heavily on the power of repetition.
If the negative is addressed sparsely, the positive must be addressed abundantly.
Focusing on and activating positive traits must be done repeatedly, at merit. If the child shows generosity or kindness or responsibility, the adult must shower that behavior with attention.
And the method must be constantly motivational and encouraging, surah tafizia, until the child internalizes and adopts the positive trait permanently.
It's all about building a robust, positive identity through concentrated, continuous, and enthusiastic encouragement.
This contrasts sparse, immediate intervention for the negative versus concentrated, repeated cultivation for the positive is the sophisticated engine of the source's character-building process, isn't it?
It is. It ensures the moral landscape of the child is built overwhelmingly through positive reinforcement and the calculated absence of attention for anything undesirable. The goal is to make the positive trait feel like the child's own natural identity.
But we know that no technique works without integrity from the source. This is where the primacy of parental modeling comes in.
Absolutely. The source emphasizes that parents' actions and conduct must be carefully observed in front of children because this is the first path to teaching the child.
The parent is the living blueprint. This circles back so powerfully to the adult's requirement for Husn al-Khuluq in Section 2.
It does. If the adult is internally pure, practicing humility, eliminating malice, speaking calmly, the child naturally absorbs this moral character without needing constant correction. The lesson isn't lectured, it's lived. If a parent screams about a mess and then tells the child to be patient, the child will follow the action, not the word, every time.
And anchoring all these strategies, providing the ultimate backup when human effort inevitably falls short, is the constant reiteration of the highest tool.
Prayer. Dua bailo. Prayer to God remains the most important instrument.
And the source says increasing prayer leads to better outcomes for the children.
Yes, prayer is the spiritual technology that safeguards the entire project. It acts as an energetic safeguard, compensating for the inevitable imperfections of parental modeling and ensuring the successful adoption of positive traits. It is the ultimate guarantor of the child's well-being and moral trajectory. It confirms that while technique is crucial, reliance on providence is paramount.
We have covered high-level morality and detailed psychological strategies. Now we descend into the realm of the physical, the tangible, and the non-negotiable.
These are the three specific, actionable physical rights that must be observed to ensure the child's respectful development. These aren't abstracts. They are physical mandates that define the adult-child relationship.
And this section demonstrates how that philosophical commitment to the child's fitra and their personhood translates into literal physical boundaries and mandatory duties.
Yes, these rules are designed as much to train the adult in respect as they are to protect the child.
Okay, let's start with right one. Breastfeeding and the husband's role. The mandate is, well, pretty standard for this philosophy. Natural breastfeeding is a right. It reinforces that requirement for sound, natural nutrition.
But then comes the surprise detail, which shifts this from a private choice to a mandatory relational duty.
And the surprise is that the husband is required to help the wife initiate natural breastfeeding. The source explicitly states this is necessary to initiate the letdown of milk.
Dururi li'inzal al-laban. The text views the physical difficulty some women face in initiating lactation not as a medical problem to be solved by professionals or formula,
But as a relational challenge.
a relational challenge requiring the husband's mandated physical assistance.
And the mechanism is described with absolute physiological specificity. The husband must suckle the wife's breast to facilitate milk letdown.
Li'inzal al-laban, yes. This is presented as a mandatory physical action for the husband to fulfill the child's non-negotiable right to natural nourishment.
This is profoundly countercultural today, isn't it? Where breastfeeding initiation is usually framed solely as a female health issue, a personal choice issue.
It's completely countercultural. The source frames it as a mandatory duty of the marriage contract itself, making the husband's physical assistance non-optional.
Because the child's access to natural nourishment is deemed an inviolable right.
It elevates the husband's role from passive supporter to an active physical participant in the child's primary physiological right.
The philosophical implication, then, is that the husband is physically demonstrating his commitment to the child's fitra and health. It reinforces a holistic nature of the marital bond as being centered on the well-being of the offspring.
Exactly. The source applies a specific physical means to achieve a necessary biological outcome, and it frames it as a non-negotiable right for the baby. It demands relational co-participation in the most intimate parts of the parenting process to ensure the fundamental natural order is maintained.
Okay, moving on to right 2. The prohibition of kissing on the mouth. The mandate is very clear. Adults must not kiss the child on the mouth. And the rationale is purely about respect and boundaries, not hygiene.
The rationale provides a powerful insight into the source's view of personhood. The source argues, essentially, if you cannot kiss the child on the mouth when they are an adult, then why should you do so when the child is young?
It's a question of consistency.
It's all consistency. Since kissing an adult non-consensually or violating their personal facial boundary is prohibited, that same standard must apply to the child, regardless of affection.
This is treating the child as a developing moral equal, whose personal physical boundaries have to be respected consistently from day one. It's recognizing their full, independent personhood from infancy.
The mouth is viewed as a sensitive zone of communication and personal space. By making this boundary absolute, the adult is forced, through consistent practice, to recognize and honor the child's bodily autonomy.
So this rule is really designed to train the adult.
To train them to view the child with the same consistent dignity they would afford a mature peer. It compels the adult to respect the child both in infancy and in adulthood, eliminating that affectionate but, patronizing intrusion that often characterizes adult-child relationships.
And finally, right 3, seating and physical boundaries. This is another incredibly specific physical mandate about proximity and positioning. The prohibition is that the child must not sit between the legs of adults, particularly in their lap in that manner.
This is social geometry as pedagogy.
Yeah.
The prohibition is very clear about the space, never between the legs. And the prescribed position is equally specific. The child should only sit on the adult's right or left thigh.
And the space between the legs is clearly designated as a zone of intimacy or boundary violation.
That's the implication, yes.
Why is that specific position sitting on the thigh so important? It seems almost overly detailed for a moral instruction.
Well, the source material sees physical positioning as a literal reflection of moral standing. Sitting on the thigh places the child in a position of honor, next to the parent, with clear physical boundaries maintained.
Whereas sitting between the legs might imply a lack of respectful separation, or even physical subordination.
It could. So, like the kissing rule, this mandate compels the adult to recognize and honor the child's rights. The specific physical positioning serves as a continuous social teaching mechanism. It's a constant reminder to the adult that the child is a separate entity whose personal space must be acknowledged, even in casual settings.
So across these 3 mandatory rights, we see this abstract moral demand for respect translated into highly actionable physical duties.
The husband's physical role in initiating feeding, respecting facial boundaries, and the mandated seating position.
And all this is centered around one single goal: compelling the adult to view the child from birth as a separate, worthy being deserving of profound respect and defined rights.
These are rules designed to train the adult out of arrogance and into humility and consistent respect. Tawadu and Husnul Khuluq. And it uses physical actions as the mechanism for moral learning. The physical discipline of the parent is the guarantee of the child's sound character and ultimately their lifelong health.
This deep dive has presented a breathtakingly cohesive closed-loop system where morality isn't just an abstract code of conduct, it's the fundamental engine of physical immunity.
It really is a complete system. We began with the intense moral purity of the child's heart, the fitra, which is so delicate it can be damaged by something as seemingly minor as a loud voice or artificial feeding.
And we learned that to protect this purity, the adult must commit to a complete moral transformation, eliminating malice, envy, and pride to achieve Husnul Khuluq.
And at the heart of the system is the profound assertion that moral integrity is physical prevention, to the extent that it eliminates the very conditions that necessitate complex medical interventions like heart surgery.
The sources then gave us the practical mechanics. a behavioral engineering strategy for children that starves negative behavior of attention and cultivates positive traits through repeated, concentrated encouragement.
Always underpinned by the foundational strength of parental modeling and spiritual prayer.
And finally, we saw how that respect translates into strict physical law, with the 3 mandatory rights: the husband's physical commitment to breastfeeding, the prohibition of kissing on the mouth to enforce consistent boundary respect, and the mandated seating position to honor the child's personhood.
It's a real challenge what the source material presents, that the external environment, the physical body, and the health outcomes we experience are merely a direct reflection of the internal moral and emotional state of the family and the community.
If we are sick, it is because we have failed to maintain salam peace, both internally and externally.
Which leaves us with a final provocative thought for you, the listener. If these sources claim that moral failure, chronic envy, hatred, lack of humility, constant relational stress is the primary engine of severe chronic disease, what specific modern physical ailments might literally disappear if we collectively manage to achieve that state of complete salam alaikum?
Consider the known scientific link between chronic stress, sustained anxiety, and the physiological impact on conditions like irritable bowel syndrome, autoimmune disorders, or systemic inflammation. If the core moral and emotional drivers of that stress were eradicated.
By truly internalizing that doctrine of equality and altruistic love for others.
How fundamentally different would our medical, pharmaceutical, and public health needs truly look?
The source suggests the ultimate frontier of human health isn't in genetic editing or new surgical techniques, but in the meticulous collective mastery of the moral landscape of the human heart.
Something profound to mull over until our next deep dive. Thank you for joining us.